Thanks for coming. Today we're going to talk about M&V and the hard part, the part they don't teach you. I don't think it's in the books, the training manuals for the performance contractors. I don't think you certainly don't learn it in college. I don't know how you're supposed to learn this stuff. I guess you learn by going along with the more senior people who teach it to you. But here's the topic, what do you do when things don't really work right? Erin is going to give this talk, and she used to be the M&V or an M&V team leader over at JCI, and now she is at Trane. And that's all I really know of her. I've just met her, I've heard of her, and she's going to introduce herself more. And one thing, this is going to be a little bit of a different talk. I want you to put your questions out as you get them. Do not wait till the end, because we're going to stop several times in this presentation and deal with questions before we go into new topics. Okay, go ahead, Erin.
Yep, Erin Daley. As John mentioned, I'm the M&V leader at Trane in the Energy Services Group. 17 years now doing M&V between Johnson and Trane. When I was asked to kind of talk about this topic, I thought of a whole bunch of things right off the top of my head. So I think everybody that's in M&V will recognize a lot of these messy situations. So I'm just going to talk through what I know of the situations and how they've been handled, or maybe from a management perspective, how somebody might go about evaluating this situation. So yeah, as John said, please put your questions in the chat and we'll hit those after we go through a few of the topics. I'm sitting out of Columbus, Ohio. Probably have some former JCI people on that I know, and some Trane folk I know that are on. So thanks for everybody for joining. That's all I got really. So we'll get started. We hit the introductions. Going to go through examples of projects that have, I'll say, problems in air quotes. Maybe perceived problems is a better way to look at it. And then how do we change the narrative on projects that have kind of gone awry or had issues. And then some tips and takeaways at the very end of the presentation. So projects with problems, one of the most common problems or perceived problems from your customer is underperformance, right? This is the reason a customer does a guaranteed project, is avoiding carrying the risk for something underperforming. So the first kind of topic hitting on that most of us have probably seen if you've been in M&V for any length of time is that you're not making your savings, right? Your energy avoidance isn't what you claimed it would be in your contract. So that comes about a few ways. Measurements show that the ECM isn't performing. That's pretty black and white. And then the second being, perhaps upon review, your calculations were either aggressive or not done correctly altogether. So looking at those two very common issues, are the measurements not performing? So that's pretty, like I said, black and white. What are your options when this is happening? So from a management perspective, I would want somebody to be looking at why is it not performing? Obviously digging into the root cause of this issue in the first place. And then where do we go from here? Because typically this issue is on the ESCO. That's why the customer did this type of project. So where do we go from here? Can you take a new set of measurements? Can you make enhancements to that ECM to get it to perform properly as you intended it to in the project? If those are kind of your level one options, in my opinion, least costly, it might be a pain to go back and do some of that, but you're likely not looking at any real large financial implications to your project. The next kind of step up would be, can you remedy that piece of equipment, meaning you need to pay for a replacement? or something in its place that might work and give you the savings you are looking for. So you might be out the cost of the item, but you're not out the savings also. And then kind of like your third level is, what can we as an ESCO offer up to make that whole? So that might be new equipment, that might be services in kind, that might be cash if this is leading to a financial shortfall on your project. Moving to the next section, the upon review, your calculations were too aggressive. This typically would happen if perhaps your safety factor, we all have worked in evaluating those. What happens when we went a little too skinny? Maybe, you know, we went 99% on lighting, and maybe our contractor was having a few bad days and we didn't get the results that we were looking for on lighting, or we went too aggressive on something more complex, right? And had a 10% factor and we needed 15. Whatever that is, also a reason the customer would do this project. So looking at it from an ESCO standpoint, one of the things that you're going to want to do, identifying the root problem being the calc, that's the calc being too aggressive is the first step. Again, you're back in the same place as you were for measurements not performing. What can we do to make that back up? Typically, if it's a calc issue though, you're not looking at replacing equipment. You're not going to spend the money to fix that because that's not part of the problem. So you are more likely going straight to those end solutions that I already discussed, which was, what can you put in its place to make that savings up, or how financially do you make the customer whole? And I would say probably the top of that would be, what happens if your calculation was incorrect altogether? Something in the calculation was wrong, you didn't catch it before the contract, and now you're kind of stuck with that. So in my opinion, the best thing to do here is fall on the sword early with your customer and be honest and transparent. That's part of measurement verification, transparency. Correct that calculation and then see where you are. If that gains you something, that might be a discussion with you and your customer about how that, you know, affects the project. But if you're still on like the losing end of savings from that, I've never had a customer get really mad that the calculation was wrong. They're probably not really reading them intently in the first place, unless you're working on a federal contract. So a lot of your customers don't really even know what those calculations say. So admitting fault to something being incorrect often ends up working in your favor, because you're buying trust with that customer as you explain that fault and how you're going to go about fixing it. So transparency is key for that section. Monetary savings not materializing. This is why I put the perceived part of the top of this slide. This might not be an ESCO problem. So this might be your customer doesn't totally understand how the contract works and or what you are technically liable for from a contractual standpoint. If their rate structures have changed, this is why we put floor rates in a contract. So the good news side, this probably is not something that is your fault. It's just something that has to be investigated and likely explained to your customer. So this is often a really great place for you to educate your customer. And if you have on-site visits regularly, it's something you can typically get through before reporting time or during a report delivery. If they're actually asking these questions, I would take that as a positive, because they're reading your report and engaged with what you had to say in the report and trying to understand it better. So take that opportunity and have an educational conversation with them. Again, you're building trust in that situation, and there's really no harm to you for rate structures changing. The next one's a little more messy. When you measure an option A and the customer is looking at bills and they don't align. Again, this is a perceived contractual problem if you're not in an option C guarantee. However, a lot of our customers, I think most of you would agree, really see energy savings as what's coming off of their utility bill, whether that's the type of guarantee they have or not. So this is a little bit more in-depth education with your customer from how did you get this amount of measured savings, but I'm not seeing that on the bill. So without delving into a complete option C measurement verification plan, you might be able to take a little bit of time out and educate them on the measurement sheet you got. Defaulting back to the lighting example, maybe you have your lighting line by line, you can pull that up, show the measurements, show the savings, and explain to them this obviously isn't changing as time goes on. These are the same lights we installed in the project. And so something else must be causing your bill to increase. Hey, from our perspective as an ESCO, this is a sales opportunity. Something else in their building is causing more energy use. That should be alarm bells for the M&V folks to do some digging and potentially get some pull-through work. So that's the end of my underperformance discussion. I don't know, John, if there's any questions out there for underperformance.
Yeah, actually, there's one comment.
Okay.
I mean, geez, I kind of want to answer it too, but that's fine. It's amazing the customer does not understand the calcs. Shouldn't the ESCO walk the customer through the calcs and inform customers a satisfied customer? You want go ahead.
I would say, should they? Yes, but that, I mean, if you just picture yourself being the one in the room who doesn't understand something, they're not always going to ask. And or the person you're delivering the report to might not have been the one who was there to understand that stuff in the first place. Okay, so that's sort of where I've seen it. Maybe a regime change or your decision maker is not the one reviewing the contract for that information, but it is who you're delivering the report to. So there's a disconnect in understanding how those calcs are put together.
I want to add one other thing, and that is that, you know, the people on this call, probably all of you could, I mean, algebra is easy, right? All of you could do algebra in your sleep. You could have done algebra when you were in 8th grade, probably. I mean, we are all really good at math, probably everyone on this call. But most people in the United States, they're not. And they're intimidated when people start talking in numbers. It makes them feel stupid, and then they don't trust you, and they feel like they're being taken advantage of. It just brings all kinds of bad memories. And so, no, there's a lot of customers who don't want to understand them or are actually incapable. Unfortunately, that's just the way it is.
Yeah, very true.
I'll see if there's another question, but that might be the only one we have. So
okay,
that's the only one we got so far. Okay. Oh, we got one more.
Oops.
Aren't the customers obliged to go by the contract? I think that was in regard to your last thing, the option A and option C.
Yes, they are, and that's why I kind of mentioned it's a perceived problem. It's perceived by the customer to be a problem because your savings, their savings that they don't think are happening, are really extra usage from something else. So your savings are happening, but the customer's not seeing that necessarily on their bill. And that's going to happen a lot of times when you have an option A project and perhaps not a lot of ECMs and their energy usage goes up anyways. So it's again just explaining how you've already proven your savings, and then finding a way to potentially turn that into more work for your company by investigating why it is that might be happening. So.
We got another question. This is crazy. All right, you guys, you're doing a great job on the questions. I appreciate it. I hope Erin does too.
Yeah.
Can you provide an example of an option A versus option C bills issue with the customer? Maybe a story or something.
I mean, pretty straightforward. I had a prison project that asked in the contract to have option A reporting and also option C information. So it wasn't a C guarantee, but I did have to turn in the utility metrics file at the time for them to go through, just so they could see that information, taking weather into account. And I did have an instance where they were pretty far off. I mean, I would think something in the plus or minus 10% range. You're really proving, you saved, especially in a year one situation, right? This stuff's newly installed, should be pretty aligned. And they were pretty far off, maybe like 20, 30% different. And they were super unhappy about that and wanted in the report, because it was going to the state, why that was likely to have occurred. So I had to explain to them that my job was to show them that it occurred, but they did not, buy an option C guarantee. So while I could throw out some ideas for why that might have happened in the facility, I was not getting paid to investigate further. So that was my answer to that specific question. Now, if there's room in your contract to do a lot of the behind the scenes digging, then I would say do it, because you're likely going to find more work for yourself, from a purchasing standpoint, not from a it's going to take more time standpoint. But that would be my best example, probably.
Okay, I'm bringing since I seem to be interrupting so much, I might as well just bring my face back up. Okay, I think that's all we got for that set of questions. Okay, next one.
Yep. So customers ignoring the contract. This is another one that happens, I say, almost routinely on reports that I'm reading currently and that I read when I was at JCI from a management standpoint. So on a wide range of projects with controls ECMs, you have customers overriding the control strategies that you put in place, and now they aren't saving what you said. So you think like, okay, this is an adjustment, most likely, so not a huge problem per se, but it is a lot of extra digging and work to potentially figure out what that adjustment, where it came from, who owns that adjustment. So obviously customers might need to change their building operation after the contract is signed. It happens all the time. Think of a school that told you they could run from 8 to 5, and they weren't going to use the buildings overnight, and then they decide they're going to have basketball league indoors, and now they're running it till 9 p.m. all winter long. And that stuff happens all the time, and that's a pretty easy conversation to have, because you most likely have collected trend data to display to the customer that they overrode a schedule, they own that extra time because it's documented what it's supposed to be in the contract. And that's a fairly easy conversation to have with the customer. Where it gets a little hairy is when you have customers whose maintenance staff might be overriding the contract because they don't trust the new controls that you put in, because they're used to it being an old way or used to having all of the control. And that's a more difficult conversation, because that person is often who you're meeting with on site. And so you don't really want to go behind that person's back when you're delivering the report to a decision maker and kind of throwing that person under the bus. But at the same time, as the ESCO, you can't eat the savings either. So it has to be written tactfully in your report that those parameters were overridden. A lot of times I would leave that pretty vague in terms of why that happened, and make them have that conversation internally and try and stay out of it. And you're just the data provider at that point, so you're kind of appeasing both sides, but staying out of the why that they might be doing those overrides. And then I would say the third version of this is when they're overriding your control strategies because they have to, which means something that you're controlling isn't actually doing what it's supposed to. And I had a project that I was the manager of where this happened, where some heating units weren't coming up to temperature fast enough for some classrooms at a school. And this became a problem to the point where they had to not let students in those rooms. Like it was that cold that they weren't coming up to temperature fast enough. And so they had to completely override the schedules. And the root cause of that was that the equipment wasn't being controlled by what we had installed. So that was a lot bigger of a mess, because then that problem went back to the very like heart of the install of the controls in the first place. And we ended up finding out that the equipment literally couldn't do what we told the customer it was going to do. So on top of being a costly mistake by having subcontractors and equipment manufacturers out to kind of get to the bottom of a very specific control strategy, we also then had to, be on the hook for the savings we weren't going to be seeing. So on the flip side of that, as painful as it was financially to the ESCO side, the customer completely happy because they still don't have a solution to the cold problem that they had in the first place. However, you are financially appeasing them by paying the shortfall part of this ECM not functioning. So I think there's a lot of avenues for customers ignoring parts of the contract, and it's typically seen in the controls. I've seen customers ignore other parts of a contract, but it's a lot more difficult because those are more hard, like equipment changes. The controls, they can get their hands on pretty easily and make a lot of changes that cause a lot of work for you to dig behind the scenes to find the root cause of those changes. So,
okay. Oh,
go ahead.
A question.
Yeah.
So how do you go about making these baseline modifications or non-routine adjustments for when they do change the controls? How do you deal with that? I mean, numerically, what are you doing? How do you make those changes?
If I had the original calculations, like especially if they're Excel based, I would expect an M&V person to be able to open that calc, because hopefully they have reviewed it and make those adjustments. So if it's time and day kind of, or setback temperature like things, that they could just go in the calc, make those changes and update the calculation. So the difference being what they're not saving anymore adjustment wise. A lot of times, however, though, control strategies are done in a building model, and you might have to involve an energy engineer from your team or a developer, however your company's set up to go about that, because the models, I mean, that's modeling certainly something that like I wouldn't go in and update, so I wouldn't expect anybody on my team to be doing that either. Something that really depends on the format that your calculation came in. And even if it was originally done in a model, if there is an Excel calc that you could quickly estimate an adjustment, I think customers are pretty lenient most times about how you came up with that difference. A lot of times though, you're straight removing it and taking it back to the contractual number. So it's pretty easy to find the difference in what they're doing.
Okay. A lot of times, they don't just change one thing, they change a lot of things. You go to a building and maybe 3/4 of the controls that you put in, the settings they're all messed up. They're all gone.
Yep.
And in that case, wouldn't it be, or what do you think about the possibility of just going back to, well, on year 2, we actually did have it all working before you screwed it up in year 7.
Yep.
So how about, why don't we take the savings from year 2, because we demonstrated this actually does work. Even though you messed it up and we don't have the budget to fix it and you don't want to fix it.
Yep.
Does that work or does that not work?
No, I would say that's a very common strategy I've seen on federal projects, because you're sort of defaulting to the most recent other set of data you have. On a regular like mush market project, you certainly can do that. I think more often I've seen them just reverting straight back to what the contract says it would be. So you're not even delving into an old measurement. You're just going to the guaranteed number for that part of the savings and taking it.
Okay. I think we got a bunch of questions. So let's see.
Okay.
Is it time for questions, or do you want to ask? Did you
No,
have
that's fine. Yeah.
I thought I had more. Maybe not. So this is one that kind of goes back to the old one. That is, even for option A and B, so this is a comment based on the older slide. It's good to include the utility bills normalized with an M&V report. And if there's any discrepancy, it's better to include potential reasons in the report and discuss with the customer. At the end, like you said, the customers, they do look at the bills. Yeah, they do.
They do.
They do.
I'm 50-50 on whether I think it's better though that you include all that stuff or you don't, because I don't think you want to answer the question that wasn't asked, as one of my former bosses used to say.
Yeah, I agree. Keep it simple, stupid. And some customers, they just want to know it's working.
Correct.
They want to keep it simple because they've got this much brain space to deal with your contract. They don't have this much.
You want to give them that value add feel, but you don't want to, inundate them with information they didn't pay you for either, because a lot of that is like extra. So unless you really included that in the cost of your M&V estimate, you just undervalued what you sold them.
Yeah.
So from a business standpoint, you need to keep that in mind.
Yeah. One other little thing that's interesting. One of my bosses from long ago in ESCO, his trick was if he had to hide something, he would throw as much data at the person who asked the question as possible, because then they'd get so confused they wouldn't be able to see what it is he was hiding. And that was his trick. So that's kind of, anyway, let's move on. Sorry.
Okay.
Oh wait, you got another question. Have you seen any control companies displaying the ESCO savings, the performance contracting savings on the BMS system? Is that even possible?
I would say I tell you where I came from and where I am. I think both are heading in that direction. I'm sure the larger ESCOs, like a Siemens also, that have their own controls platform. I think everybody's moving in that direction. I don't think most of them are 100% ready for prime time to do that. And I would say be wary of somebody that says that they are doing that. It's pretty complex from a control standpoint to take all of the strategies that are being implemented in a building and then go back and also have your controls folks that are doing that understand that our contracts aren't being guaranteed from inception of when they installed the controls widgets. Our baselines are from prior to that. So there's a lot of times discrepancy in the installation and what they're calling savings and like what that time period is. So do I think it can happen? Absolutely. I don't know of any that's currently showing that, although there might be.
Yeah, I would think it'd get difficult with the baseline modifications as well. It's like if they override all the controls and then it's going to show, oh, you aren't saving anything. It's like, yeah, but we haven't put the modifications in yet. And then all good. Okay, your turn.
Okay. So the next slide I called stuff happens. So what happens when random things kind of go wrong on your projects or kind of take your projects in a different course? And some of those things might be, customer driven. Some of them might just be, it happened, right? So what do you do with it now? So a common one I've seen since the water fixtures have gone like extreme low flow is they're having clogging. So one thing that I learned is unless you're in a high rise and you have extreme low water fixtures, it would really behoove you to scope your piping in buildings beforehand. That's a cost during development, but it might save you and your customer headaches after installation, because everybody wants to save water and it seems like a no-brainer. But if you are in a prison where inmates are stuffing things down the toilets for fun and clogging them all the time, you might not want low flow fixtures. It's going to make the problem worse and happen more often. Similarly, you might have an elementary school where little kids just don't understand how much their, toilet paper they're putting in the toilet, or how often they're flushing the toilets. And, it doesn't always work, with the best of intention. Random things like that can derail. So what I would say is, maybe as a best practice to kind of have that, if you call it like a post-mortem or something discussion, or a board where you're putting this, problem that you found on the job that you think might apply to other projects, and making sure that your team, M&V, install, developing folks all understand that, like, hey, this is a problem that's happened more than once now. This is how we fixed it, and going from there. From an M&V standpoint, on the low flow water fixture example, that becomes a costly fix. So it's not something that you're probably going to want to eat financially as the installer. So this becomes like a delicate conversation with the customer, because from their end, they're going to say, hey, you were the experts. If you didn't think this thing would work here, you knew it was a school, you knew it was a prison, like you knew X, Y, and Z. That conversation gets really hard, and I'm not sure there's like a routine answer for how the end of that conversation plays out. Depends on a lot of things. If it is, personnel in your facilities causing the issue, that's not going to be an ESCO problem that they want to pay for. So that becomes a conversation you need to have about using the new equipment properly, and or monitoring use from like an inmate standpoint of what they can and can't put down there. What other items or like features could you add that would help prevent this? Whether that's a behavior thing or a literal like feature to the water fixtures behind the scenes that might help solve this problem from getting clogged in costly piping areas. So I would just say, have a good relationship with your customer. It's going to make any of these conversations better. But the water thing, I've seen it a bunch actually, and gets very costly. So perhaps one that's kind of more on the up and coming is increase in electrical usage, because the IT department has purchased, thousands more gadgets. Everyone has things plugged in all day. I mean, I'm sitting at my desk and I have like 3 different things plugged in just within arm's reach of me right now. So if you picture that over a school district, the usage becomes, X-fold of what you're looking at. So one way to alleviate that from happening is to have a really good plug load audit for a school district or a local government set of buildings, where you're getting that information up front. And although you might not think it affects your guarantee in the now, it might affect it later. And particularly if you have an option C style guarantee in one of those facilities, this is 100% item that I would want listed in the contract, that this is what was there in the beginning. And that way, if they add a server room or they add, 45 more kids, in each grade of school, with plug-in tablets and laptops or charging carts, or you name it, the school districts plug it in. So having that baseline agreed to in your contract solves a lot of this up front. And all you have to do is stay on top of what they have, right? This is going to be one of those first places you dig into in an option C guarantee if they're not making their savings from an electrical standpoint. And then the last one, changes in billing structures. This is again one of those perhaps perceived problems from the customer. So if you're doing your due diligence and you have floor rates in the contracts, I would say the more detailed those rates are in your contract, the better off you're going to be for changes in structures later. I've had all the way from, just rate changes to straight up they kick, people off of a certain billing structure, and their entirety of the rates for their demand, their consumption, all the ratchets, tariff, like everything changed. And some that makes your savings look really good, but some it really doesn't. So you might have gotten them in a lower billing bracket, if you will, and that actually made their base charges double or something to that effect. So you're really going to want to note a lot of these things in your contract, and that helps save you from a contractual standpoint when random stuff happens. And then the rest of it becomes you didn't expect this customer, we didn't expect this, and it's a little bit easier, amicable conversation in the long term if you have the documentation up front. So
good. You ready for some more questions?
yeah, questions are good.
I do. What would you recommend as the lowest flow for prisons or schools or other types of things?
I
I
would
don't know
not be
if
the
you know
person to
that or
ask.
not.
Yeah, wouldn't be the person to ask that. It's probably going to be a project dependent question.
So yeah, have you seen signage or education or something like that to help solve clogging issues?
Yes, I mean, I've been a part of some energy education for K through 12 schools where there's kind of a behavioral piece to the project as well. So you can sell that as sort of a consultative service or just include it in your M&V time where you're out there as the project's having the renovations happening to explain to students and oftentimes staff, like what is happening, why it's happening, how the new features on new equipment that affects them in the everyday might work, and what else they can do to kind of jump in on it. So anything from kind of some Earth Day celebrations to maybe for your younger kids, like having a class day where you go in and talk to them about electricity or natural gas or things like that, and just making them more aware in general. They enjoy that stuff and they're learning and going to help do nothing but help your project in the long run meet its goals. So yeah, worth it if you can get that in the project.
Okay, here's another comment. This one, he talks about a baseline whereas natural gas was $10 per MMBTU. The new rate is going to be $5 per MMBTU, but your contract prevents that from being a problem, right?
Mm-hmm. You should.
So the contract said usually, I mean, it seems like everybody in the United States, most of the ESCOs, they're using the same contract. I don't know who wrote the original one. Maybe Johnson did, like in the
I don't know.
or something, and everybody copied it. I don't know what happened. Maybe made a few changes here and there, but yeah, they usually say we're going to use the rate at time of signing the contracts or current rate, whichever one is greater.
Correct.
The new rate. I mean, geez, if natural gas becomes free, it doesn't matter. The floor rate was $10. So
right.
That's not a problem with those contracts.
Right. It's sort of like you're saving it either way, but I can only claim it in one of the directions, and the rest you're sort of agreeing that they saved it, but I didn't have anything to do with it. So
right.
Just making a level playing field for yourself.
Is there a certain pattern of either energy consumption or savings when it comes to energy assessment for schools or commercial buildings? Boy, that's a really general question. How do you want to, I don't know if you can answer that.
Pattern? I'm not sure I understood the question. What?
Yeah, I'm gonna read it again. Is there a certain pattern of either energy consumption or savings when it comes to energy assessments for schools and commercial buildings? I think they're asking, what are the typical ECMs you run into for schools?
Yeah, I mean, I would say you can see typical, right, the usage from something like an Energy Star on those buildings. So if it's usage related, I would default to something like that, or your CBEX data information regionally for certain types of buildings. And then from an ECM perspective, yeah, I'm sure all ESCOs have their standard list of, we're probably going to look at these ECMs on these kinds of buildings. Mm-hmm. Your low-hanging fruit, the lighting, water, occupancy sensors, like lower cost to install, bigger bang for your buck savings wise. But as time goes on, those become fewer and, farther between, that those things are still hanging out there. So I think that's why you're starting to see ESCOs routinely look at more plug load audit type stuff. What can we do to decrease, IT gadget consumption? Basically capitalizing on what's left of the low hanging fruit, kind of by taking it to the next step. What kind of advanced lighting can you do? Not just going from like a fluorescent, to LED kind of fixture. What else are you doing? Can you add sensors, daylight, saving, measures? Those kind of things, I think, are kind of like your next level low hanging fruit if the customer doesn't have tons of money to invest in big HVAC equipment.
Okay, here's another one. So some of the listeners are foreign. They're from other countries, not the United States, or they're not from Canada. And so this one might be from one of them. I don't know. It says, hi, I'm pretty green to the industry. I have a K-12 client, million square foot. What's the most important contract language to add that you've learned from, that you know of, to add to the contract to make sure there's, let's say, he said to add cushion, but I think what he means is to make sure you don't get screwed by things you weren't really thinking about.
Yeah, I would say there isn't one thing. It's just the more documentation you put in the contract up front, the likely it is more you're alleviating a legal problem later. So the most risk-saving time of the contract from an M&V perspective is in development. So the better baseline you have, the better contract language you have, good savings calc reviews, like all of those things are going to save you more time, money, and headache later than anything that happens in the M&V period itself.
And are the federal contracts, are those available online? I mean, can anyone get a federal ESPC
I think
contract?
so. No, I think you can look them up.
Okay. Yeah. So I think most of the ESCOs, they or people from most ESCOs have worked at other ESCOs and have taken their knowledge of contractual problems with them, and also have a contract that works based on. And the United States, most of them are very similar. And and so what I would suggest if you're in another country is see if you can get your hands on a contract written in the United States. And
even just the FEMP document itself, I feel like has more contractual language examples than the IPMVP does.
Yeah.
So you could even start there.
Good. That's it for questions for now.
Okay. Let's see. Okay, so this is this one where projects intertwine. Not sure this is as routine as some of the other things that we've talked about already, but certainly I've had this happen where I am now and at my old job, so it definitely does happen. Again, this is where your contract documentation is super important. So what happens when a customer that you're doing an energy savings contract with decides, hey, by the way, we also got money to do, add this other building, and they want it attached to the same meter that your building is on, and you have an option C contract, and like all the things are going in your mind, like, please don't do that. Please don't do that. This is going to be so much more work. I think having that conversation with your customer about, obviously, if we could get that work right as a contractor, that would be hugely helpful. But if you can't, and that's already in the works, you better have a really good baseline and a really good relationship with your customer to make this go smooth, because there are going to be a lot of adjustments that are going to happen if they're adding building square footage or changing the use of a building where you already started construction on your set of ECMs. So I would say it's a complete conflict of interest, might be a strong word, but to have two ESCOs working in the same building, I would not want to be a part of that at all. They have competing interests. But if it's just complete other construction project, again, the best thing to do is have a documented baseline of everything that was in your project at the beginning of the project. So your baseline, what are you doing in that facility and how you're getting that savings. And then if it's possible for you to be talking about the adjustments with your customer as that other construction is happening, I think that would be hugely beneficial. And if you can get any meter data from your job installation being done before their construction interferes with it to help kind of make that base point for your post scenario, you have at least a couple months maybe where you can get that data would go a long way to proving what your adjustment should be. Otherwise, this becomes something that can get really strung out. People agree to disagree on how much energy one side of the project's using versus the other. And if it's not another energy savings project, those people don't care how much energy that square footage is using, that their job is to install it and leave, right? Turnkey style. So you have to then work with your customer to understand that's part of the building. You should be putting that in the same contractual parameters from a scheduling and set point standpoint. And then, making the adjustments for the extra usage that square footage is consuming, especially important if you have an option C project. The next one, customer not understanding their contract. So a lot of you are probably saying, dang, if my salesperson was good, this really wouldn't be a problem. But again, you have customer turnover. So it could have been like the greatest sales spiel. We explain everything. Maybe you were even at the sales, pitch to the customer agrees, you get down the road. But the customer really, at the heart of it, doesn't understand all that technical jargon you went over before they signed the contract. Kind of back to one of those first slides where it's like, should they understand it? Yes. Do they always understand it? No. So that's just how it is. So again, having a good customer relationship goes a long way to making the customer understand what you own as a responsibility and what they own as a responsibility. Some of that might be data they need to be giving you that they haven't been for changes made in the building, construction that's happening, X, Y, and Z things that they're having problems with. Because if they're having problems with it and we don't know as the ESCO that they're having problems with it, and now you haven't had any time to remedy that situation, if you're not routinely talking to your customer, that kind of sucks, because you could have fixed the problem and not maybe had a shortfall. But now that you didn't talk to them for a while and you didn't find out till the season was over, you can't go back and fix the cooling season problem when you're already in heating season, if that's when you found out about the problem. So regular customer interaction and communication, especially on an option C project, is really essential to that project succeeding. And then, arguments over adjustments. This happens all of the time. So the construction overlap thing might not be common, but the adjustments is a common thing. We saw that in the last few slides as well. So again, having the good relationships with your customer, constant communication, having your contract language spelled out to what you can and cannot claim adjustment for. What is the customer responsible for following in that contract? And what are they not? Because sometimes you might think it should be an adjustment, but you never told them this was something you would adjust for. And then that just becomes like a learning opportunity for you and, not an adjustment for them. So take your time at contract writing time and make sure all your I's are dotted and T's are crossed from a risk standpoint.
Okay, you ready for another one?
Sure.
I don't know if there's a question or a comment. We'll find out. Best way to handle a performance savings issue when the customer did a turnkey job on top of the performance contract. Yeah. Okay. So basically, it's your case one.
Yeah, the construction overlap. If your contract's already written before that happened, you really need to work your contractual language for the adjustments that you can take for what they installed. So I would certainly be out on site or asking the customer for those mechanical drawings, getting the information you can for the equipment they installed, especially if it's connected to the same meter that your data is coming from. So you can take adjustments from nameplate information, or if you have access to their BAS and that stuff's on there, I'd start trending all of that information so you can show the customer or a third-party reviewer that you've done your due diligence to make a fair adjustment for what they installed.
Yeah, that's tough. Yeah, there's just so many different possibilities for that answer, right? I mean, is it an option A, an option B, or C, or a D? And
right,
it's a little different for all of them.
Yeah, probably not going to run into a lot of that if you have option A, because it's a little easier to keep yours separate than theirs. But for sure on the option C or D side becomes a bigger problem.
And it could be on B as well, if they have heat recovery now or something that's just changing temperatures that you were measuring, that you were using to calculate stuff.
Yeah.
Let's see, what if you go to a building where a retrofit was implemented per the recommendation by another consultant and you notice their calculation was wrong? How do you approach it considering they are not getting the calculated savings? Now, I'm going to read it again because I don't understand myself. What if you go to a building where a retrofit was implemented per the recommendation by another consultant? Hold on, this isn't the best interface. And you notice the calculation was wrong. How do you approach it considering they are not getting the calculated savings? So I guess, is he saying, or is this person asking, what if you weren't the ESCO, but you were just some consultant and you noticed it was all wrong? Is that what he's asking?
Right, or a consultant made the savings calc, or a competitor made a savings calc, and now you're realizing that they can't reach that.
Yeah.
I don't want to throw people under the bus or anything, but I'm probably going to point it out because I don't want something from that. If I have a project there, intertwining with my project and potentially causing a problem. So I would probably phrase it more in the form of a question. Has this been reviewed? Have you been seeing these savings routinely? I'd approach it a little softer like that, but.
Yeah, I'm the more aggressive type, and I just say this is bull crap. This is wrong. And I mean, I'm not really socially the best person, and so maybe your way's better. Maybe that's why you're a
as long as you're pointing it out one way or another, the soft way or harsh way, it is in your purview, in my opinion, to point it out if you also have a project in that building. So.
Yeah, it's important. It's important to point it out in terms, maintaining your integrity, I guess.
Yeah.
But there's all this political stuff going on, right? And maybe it was the supervisors or the judges or whatever cousin that implemented it or something like that, or you don't know that, the politics behind it, which could totally be what they don't want to hear. And but but he was asking in terms of being a consultant, if he saw the ESCOs had done something totally wrong. Oh, here's another one. Do you ever get questions from customers about the interactive effects, such as heating and cooling penalties and credits? How are these handled in M&V plans or contracts?
I would say we do get those. The answer, if you have an option A or sometimes B, I would say, is the description of how you accounted for those interactive effects in your calculations, meaning how did you cascade the savings? So how you cascaded the ECMs to not be double dipping for savings purposes. And in option C, obviously, it's a lot more melded together. But that's probably where I would start in that explanation is this is how we put them in the building model. If you're doing a building model, it's usually really easy to show on the output what ECMs you kind of put in first and started chipping away or building up savings. And then if there's spreadsheets, you just have to, I would say, do your due diligence upon review of those calcs before you go to contract, and make sure that you've kind of taken those same steps that a building model forces you into as they run the parametric runs in those. If you're doing that in Excel version, it's kind of easy to show how you're not double dipping on the savings, and therefore like alleviating or you're taking into account almost by doing it in a certain order that there is an interactive effect. Unless your calc can show it. Like I know a lot of lighting calcs now have HVAC savings in them. So, I mean, you could show some interactive effects if your calc tool has that ability.
But how do you handle this in M&V plan or in the contracts? I think what you described as best practice engineering, but you don't have to do that. If you want to be totally unscrupulous, you can choose not to cascade your calculations and double dip as much as possible, triple dip and quadruple dip, and get all kinds of savings. It's maybe even more than their existing bill. You can probably do that. I never see anything in the standard performance contracts themselves or M&V plans that say a section on, look, we're cascading savings. It's an option B project, and you know, here's how we're handling all these different ECMs. I've never seen that.
Yeah, I've never seen it in writing. I would say I feel like I've definitely had that discussion during an M&V workshop on how we don't do that in our contracts, but I don't know that there's a great way of writing that out anywhere. So yeah, you're not going to see it in writing.
And the other thing is that most of your clients, I don't know, I'm going to make a guess. I mean, you know your clients more than I, but I would say 80% of them wouldn't know what the hell you were talking about if you wrote it in.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if the person before thought it was strange that, you know, they didn't understand the calcs in the contract, they sure aren't going to understand the interactive effects. So
no,
right.
Absolutely not. Oh, so someone said, I have seen some language around accounting for the interactive effects. So someone has seen that. I haven't. So, okay. Okay, do you have another page or? That's
yeah,
it?
I think there's, I mean, I can kind of go through this one quick. I think this is a little more your extreme cases. I had one at JCI and I've had one here where the utility company is the one causing the delay, whether that's in sign-offs or permitting or literal, you know, interconnects for solar projects that aren't happening in the time frame that you originally thought for whatever reasons. You have a third-party reviewer that's, you know, not accepting a report that's holding up your project. So there's all these kind of like out of your control and potentially out of the customer's control. So I always revert back to the communication being key. You know, there is typically contractual language for force majeure kind of things, which if your customer agrees, it's kind of one of those, maybe you buddy up with the customer and you can both agree to not like the utility that's holding this up or, you know, whatever. I'd say the third party review part is a little more tricky because you're clearly in an M&V period by the time they're not, you know, accepting your report. There typically is language though in like your T's and C's of a contract that go over the amount of time they have to review a project and accept it and move on. So I would say you want to work with them as much as possible, but this is typically covered in contract language. It's just going to be in your best interest to really have some empathy for the customer on, you know, we understand that like this is causing, you know, difficulties on the customer end. And it's, you know, if it's happening in construction, you know, the ESCO's not able to close out their construction project. They're not getting that final check of payment either. So let's have some good contract language, good communication with the customer. And this is certainly something that should be escalated up the chain, as it's happening during an installation, or if the third party reviewing an M&V report like drags on and on. So we can talk to legal at your company about, what are your options here? So I've seen them resolved in many different ways, whether the, ESCO and customer abandon something or start M&V late on certain ECMs, like agree that those savings won't be there in the first year or 2 years or whatever the delay looks like. Most customers have been pretty good about the install delays. Like I said, the reviewer thing gets a little trickier. I don't know, probably depends on why they're holding up your report. So I would say that's a good one to stay in contact with your customer, but realize that their third-party reviewers really working for them and probably trying to justify them getting paid. So
Right.
likely to have a handful of questions, but should be able to be reviewed in a timely manner.
I got a handful more questions. Why, do you have more slides? How many more slides you got?
I have
Running like, we should be stopping.
three.
What do you want to do? You want to answer more questions or you want to do your slides?
Let me wrap it up if there's something I can answer at the end. But I mean, I think they kind of like what everybody probably has heard is, the relationship part of this is absolutely key, right? So the last problem slide I have up here is at the end of the road in a relationship with your customer. So what happens when your customer becomes non-responsive?
Yeah.
Not really the place you want to be in as an ESCO. You probably need to understand why. Is there a new person that works there? They don't even understand or know that there was a project, that they were supposed to be giving you information, that, what this job was about in the first place. Understand what they're not responding to. Are they not responding to your requests for utility bill information? Are they not responding to the report that you sent them, to invoices, etc.? How long do you keep trying that? Going to be on a case-by-case basis, and your company's, willingness to keep trying. How important is this customer to your portfolio? How big is the contract? Again, why are they not responding? And understand that there is usually an appropriate way to end your M&V term with them. If they are non-responsive, you likely have that right based on the legal language in your contract. Typically only going to happen if they're not paying their contract. So if they're paying, your company is probably going to tell you to keep doing M&V, even if you have to revert back and kind of turn everything into a mutually agreed number. If they're paying for, not a great report, they're going to get not a great report. That's how it's going to go. I mean, that's just sort of it. But there isn't an appropriate way to end M&V when the customer, either no longer sees value, which is sad, or simply can't afford it anymore for whatever financial reason is hindering them. You're always going to want to get your management involved and get appropriate documentation of that cancellation, because otherwise you're tied to that guarantee. So you want to make sure that everything is documented here. And then rounding it out, just all the things that kind of I've been talking about, common thread through some of these slides is research what the issue is coming from, research or understand what the stakeholder's point of view is. So what is your customer's point of view? Are they even perceiving this as a problem? Is it an actual problem? How big of a problem it is? And then what does your contract say? Does the contract agree that, yes, if the customer's complaint is valid, this is an actual issue I need to take care of from a contractual standpoint, meaning saving, shortfalls, new equipment, measurements, etc. And then, what are your options to do that remedy? So is that financial? Are there other things we can do before that? What else can I get you, to solve that problem? So I think the communication is just my #1 theme, and customers love responsiveness. So that's something that like I've always prided myself on, whether it's managing teams of people or responding to customers, is no one wants to be left hanging. Like when you have a problem at your house with something and you call for service or you call somebody for technical assistance, you hate getting put on hold for a long time. You hate sending an email and nobody writes you back. Like, let your customer know you're working on the problem. You don't have to have the answer right away, but let them know that you're working to get to that remedy and understand their problem and then work towards a remedy there. And then lastly, I would say change the narrative. Like I think I had kind of a, put that frown upside down title on here earlier, and you really need to know your project and the customer and like what is their desired outcome. Because if they absolutely need the savings to pay for the project, what you do in a challenging time is going to dictate, what you do based on the outcome they're hoping to see. If this customer, did an ESPC project because they need stuff and this is just the mechanism for them to get stuff, they probably want a certain fix that's different than if they need those savings, financially to pay for things. So you have to know your project and customer. Learn from past projects. It's like a great tool and to not, make the same mistake twice in your company. It's a good risk mitigation strategy. And I think a lot of ESCOs have these conversations regularly on like best practices, lessons learned kind of calls. And then take your negatives and turn them into positives. What can you, how can you reframe that shortfall conversation as bad? You've got to see the opportunity in it and not the hardship in doing the work or, having air quotes like blemish on, your portfolio of projects. So yes, underperforming projects they're hard to work on. It's not great to have a shortfall by any means, but if you do have a shortfall, it's often an opportunity to sell more work or make a better relationship with your customer. So like not every, underperforming job turns out really bad. So that's the crux of it. So I think that's the last slide from me, John, and then these are back to you.
Let's see, I'm going to go over the last couple questions, and that is, here's one. This one's a crazy one. It's crazy. I don't think there is a good answer for this. Suggestions for an option C guarantee where all utility bills are estimated.
Don't do it. I don't know.
That's gotta be a federal fund. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, maybe the laugh is the only answer you're going to get out of.
Yeah. Yeah. Run the other direction. I don't know.
I think, yeah, run the other direction. Go ahead and do your option D, or really it should be a B. It should be a B or an A. Okay. How do we register for webinars? Oh boy, that's a really good question. So is there another slide? Can you go to the next slide? I don't know if there is another. Yes. Go to webinars@abraxasenergy.com and just say, how do I register for webinars? And someone will get back to you or put you on the list or something like that. That's how you do that. Thanks for finding us. And that's it. Hey, Erin, that was great. You did a great job. I really enjoyed it. That was good. Thank you. Thanks everyone for coming.
Everybody.
Next month.